Welcome to Hominid History Hub. Thank you for being here tonight. Subscribe if you enjoy ancient human reality and tell me in the comments where you are watching from so we can see how wide this story travels around the planet. Now let us move into the story itself, because what you are about to hear is not fiction, this is not fantasy, and it is not a campfire exaggeration. This is a branch of human history that begins inside hard scientific data, archaeological evidence, fossils, skeletal proportions, and patterns of biology that demand an explanation. Because the story of ancient giants does not start with folklore. It begins with the uncomfortable fact that humans were not alone, and that our species was only one branch inside a world that once contained multiple hominids at the same time, and some of those species were larger and stronger than us, with different environmental adaptations, different survival advantages, and possibly genetic traits we no longer possess. And the first thing we need to acknowledge is that when scientists reconstruct the past, they are not beginning from myth, they are beginning from bone, and bone is honest. Bone does not lie to comfort the present-day narrative. Bone does not protect anyone from uncomfortable implications. And when we look at the fossil record, the first thing we must say without fear is this: the human world was once more diverse than anything you were taught in school, and inside that diversity, some species were physically larger, and some had features that matched descriptions found thousands of years later. Inside oral traditions we once assumed were metaphor, and this is where the story begins, inside the layers of the earth, where bones come out of sediment with proportions that do not match modern humans, and when those bones appear, the scientific community must choose between two responses: rewrite the map of human evolution, or ignore the anomaly until it goes quiet again, because anomalies do not fit funding models, and they do not fit clean textbook diagrams, but anomalies are where truth lives. And when ancient skeletons appear with unusual strength markers on muscle attachment points, unusual thickness in cortical bone, unusual shoulder breadth, unusual wrist structure, and leg leverage ratios optimized for power over endurance, then the possibility emerges that the concept of prehistoric giants is not a hallucination. It is a distorted memory of real species that once lived beside us. And if that is true, then the ancient giant stories are not exaggeration. They are cultural echoes of a time when multiple human types walked the earth, and some types were simply built different. This line of thinking will eventually force the modern world to reconsider everything we think we know, because if size variation was real, then what else was real? What else survived in myth, because the only way to preserve the memory of other hominids after extinction was to turn them into legend, and this also means the fossil record is not complete. And it also means the most shocking discoveries are still buried, and the next part of this story moves deeper into those possibilities and connects them to the ancient oral traditions that refuse to die, because inside those traditions there may be preserved information that science has not wanted to face, and this truth will not go away ever again. In remote valleys and ridges of Asia, when the night falls and the mind goes still, there are questions older than any language. And somehow the closer we move into modernity, the more they gnaw at the edges of our certainty. The great geologic clock kept turning, mountains rose, broke and rose again, and hominins did not just survive the changes, they absorbed them, they became change itself. They were the experiments that shaped future possibility, and their silence is now the dark line between the known and the forbidden memory of deep earth history. Denisovans interacted with Neanderthals, with Homo sapiens, and with other unknown hominin forms that have long vanished, never recorded, with evidence only as fractured ghosts diluted in grand mobility. And still, the genetic footprint they left in humans survives like an ancient whisper through bone, blood, and muscle. Some peoples carry traces of them that affect heart function, limit pain thresholds, or allow more optimized cellular metabolism at high altitude. In other words, they are not just a relative from the distant past, they are one of the architects of the systems inside us. This makes Denisovan mystery unique, because we do not hold major complete fossils of these people, but we hold their code embedded in living populations. The world tried to break humans into isolated time layers, yet the past keeps erupting through people walking alive now, breathing in the same climate change they once endured. There is a chance Denisovans saw catastrophic volcano super-eruptions, the death of megafauna lineages, intense ice edges, and the new expanding forest corridors opening like migratory arteries across continents. For every group that survived, another fell, and this pattern is written in the layers of Earth like a stratified library, where nothing sits in false isolation because everything interacted with something. In this shared chaos, Denisovans may have developed extremely flexible cognitive adaptations that did not belong to strict binary categories of tool culture or hunting routine. They shifted their strategies to suit environmental pressure in subtle, unquantifiable ways, where the human brain learned to both yield and fight without predictable cycle. They were not merely primitive, they were counterintuitive. They were patient. They were aware that the scale of the planet was not static. They understood that nothing about Earth stayed equal. We are still learning how to decode fragmented timelines because we still do not understand how some lines remained and others vanished without trace. What makes Denisovan's story more unsettling is that we are dealing with a species whose most powerful presence exists almost entirely through what they left inside us. Instead, from the physical remnants of stone and bone, and this is hard for humans because we are comfortable with things that can be held, measured, observed, photographed, and placed in display cabinets. We struggle with the idea of an intelligent hominin form whose ghost survival comes from within ourselves, not from their skulls in museum cases. Denisovans did not leave behind the self-contained snapshot like some Neanderthal assemblages. They are instead a living continuum in existence, a presence without center, an absence with teeth, and their haunting continues through our cellular machinery, like a lineage viral memory that is neither fully dead nor fully alive. It just remains in human bodies without permission and without complete understanding, and so the story goes forward, deeper, blacker, and more uncomfortable. Denisovan legacy also suggests that culture is not linear in progression, but multi-directional impact where memory and adaptive patterns of mind can be anchored in body without recorded language, and this breaks the Western comfort of linear time models because Denisovans force us to confront the idea that history was not just written by the visible winners, but also by the unknown shadows who were equally present, yet invisibly recorded. Our existence today is mosaic, not monument, and this mosaic contains broken, incomplete tesserae that were not carved by us and not owned by us, but still functioning like ancestral data imprinted before civilization, formed code systems in the way we understand code systems now. And every time humans attempt to reduce this story into simplified narrative, it fights back, because Denisovan presence is proof for that ancient, unknowable realms do not need our permission to remain significant. They existed outside any standard framework we have today, and this is why the story is still not finished nor closed, because it still moves. End, still uncertain. Unknown, end. Across ancient seasonal shifts, these beings learned something that modern humans constantly forget. Earth was never stable, and survival was never guaranteed by strength, but by the ability to revise identity fast. This was not adaptation over thousands of years only. Sometimes adaptation was demanded over one generation, sometimes over one lifetime, sometimes over one catastrophic winter. And this is where Denisovan mind becomes terrifyingly impressive, because they were not responding to a single environment, they were responding to change itself as the environment. Their world was not a straight line. It was an unstable system that kept rearranging itself like a moving riddle, and their bodies did not resist that instability. Their bodies leaned into it. They carried multiple survival solutions inside them, like layered code that could activate when needed. To them, the Earth was not a territory to conquer. It was a force to study, to read, to predict, to merge with, and to bend around. Nature was an opponent sometimes, but also a partner, and sometimes a tutor. They understood that dominance was not a strategy. Longevity was, And in those eras, knowledge was not stored in carved stone or symbolic written artifacts. Knowledge lived inside the body, inside instinct, inside inherited neural architecture, inside the way attention functioned, inside memory that was not language dependent. This makes Denisovan intelligence extremely difficult to measure using modern frameworks because our science expects intelligence to announce itself through artifacts, measurable objects, traceable pattern behavior. But Denisovan intelligence may have been built more like silent calibration. They could move through multiple biomes without carrying permanent material culture signatures. They learned from temporary landscapes and temporary prey systems. They learned from shifting food webs, microclimates, floods, and collapses. They were not the type of hominin that left behind grand curated archaeological stage sets. They were the type that lived through the silent intervals that other species could not survive. And the earth remembers species who can stay alive through silence far longer than those who build monuments. This is why Denisovans disturb modern scientific comfort, because they represent a mode of existence where the most powerful culture was invisible, where the most impactful knowledge was intangible, where the most permanent influence did not fossilize. They remind us that some of the greatest architects of the human future may not be the ones that left behind the most objects. They may be the ones who left behind the most capacity. Their fingerprints might be hiding inside the unconscious layers of humanity today, inside instinctual fear responses, inside night anxiety, inside ritual impulses we still cannot categorize, inside strategic intuition that activates under threat even when logic fails, even inside subtle physiological advantages that cannot be reverse engineered by science yet. Denisovans left influence that we still cannot fully name. History loves neat categories, but Denisovans force us into a darker truth. Some parts of the human story were not designed to be neatly archived. Some parts were designed to be carried. Some parts were designed to be felt. Some parts were designed to be inherited without understanding. And this silent inheritance is still moving through us like a shadow lineage that refuses to dissolve. And while we map genomes and publish models and argue over branches of phylogeny, the strange part is this. Denisovans may have never seen themselves as separate. They may have never lived inside the rigid category of species identity the way we obsess over now. They may have experienced humanity as a continuum, not a definition. They may have known that the boundary between hominin groups was porous, exchangeable, permeable, negotiable, because survival demanded permeability. Walls and purity would have been suicide. Mixture was currency. When Neanderthals met Denisovans, when early Homo sapiens met them, these interactions were not necessarily wars of extinction every time. Sometimes they may have been negotiations of advantage. Sometimes they may have been strategic mergers. Sometimes they may have been knowledge exchanges that required no language at all, only recognition of shared shape, shared hunger, shared fear of winter, shared threat of sudden death. In that era, intelligence was not a contest to decide who deserved the future. Intelligence was a network to survive the present. We assume advancement is always material, but the Earth does not measure intelligence that way. The Earth measures intelligence in continuity. Denisovans existed through collapses, through climate reversals, through volcanic winters, through megafauna crashes that erased stable food chains overnight. They survived through multiple planetary resets. That is not a small thing. That makes them one of the most battle-tested branches our lineage ever produced. And somehow, they vanished anyway. But the vanishing is also not simple, because they did not vanish completely. They dissolved into us. They became part of the wiring inside the future species instead of standing beside it. Which leads to the most uncomfortable possible question: how many pivotal innovations in human endurance came from minds that were not Homo sapiens? We celebrate ourselves as the final apex. But what if the apex was constructed by those who died before the apex existed? This is why Denisovans force us to rethink everything about the way we interpret deep time. Maybe extinction is not always failure. Maybe extinction in this case was transmission. Maybe the record is not broken. Maybe the record was just transferred into a different vessel. And if that is true, then Denisovans are not a ghost species. They are a foundation species, and foundations do not need visible remains to matter. They only need influence that survives long enough to become indistinguishable from the structure itself. Their story is not a side branch of human history. Their story is inside human history. So now the strange paradox begins. The only reason we even know Denisovans existed is because a tiny fragment of finger bone and a single tooth in a cold cave carried information across 40 to 50,000 years of silence. Not stories, not art, not symbols carved into stone, data trapped inside calcium. It means the dead encoded a message the future would eventually be smart enough to interpret. It means they did not disappear into oblivion without leaving proof. They simply left proof that could only activate when the future reached a specific level of cognitive maturity. Denisova Cave is not just a fossil site, it is a time trigger. And that raises a question almost no one likes to face. What else is buried in Earth that we are not ready to understand yet? The more we decode ancient DNA, the more we discover that our lineage is not a straight climb up a ladder. It is a braided river. Multiple currents merging, splitting, crossing again, dying in one region, exploding in another. Denisovans were not the strange outsiders. They were one of those currents, a current powerful enough to alter the genetic future of the surviving branches. A current that left fingerprints in the blood-oxygen pathways of Himalayan populations. A current that left marks in people thousands of miles from where they ever lived. A current that remained invisible until technology caught up to the ghosts. This is why deep-time anthropology feels less like history and more like a mirror turned backwards. Every new discovery forces us to admit almost everything we assumed about human uniqueness was built on incomplete knowledge. They were not side characters. They were co-authors, co-builders of the human condition, co-engineers of future survival. And the strangest realization of all is this: humanity did not evolve alone. Humanity evolved through collaboration with the unknown, and Denisovans were one of those unknowns. The cave felt deeper now. The more the modern mind tried to explain the phenomenon, the more the phenomenon resisted being reduced to normal language. This is where the Denisovan signal felt most visible, not in the fossil, not in the bone fragment, but in the way the environment itself was able to lift the brain into a different alignment. Humans today believe intelligence is about speed and external storage. Denisovans operated on long wavelength cognitive scale. Their intelligence was about direction, not volume. Their intelligence was about relational structure, not noise. They did not need endless inputs. They needed precise, high resolution, few inputs that could anchor entire lifetime orientation. That is why this cave feels like time reactor, not museum. Imagine their winters. Endless night. Endless wind moving across glacial face. Endless quiet. Their brain trained itself under silence. Silence was the main teacher. Silence was the main instrument. That silence sculpts shape of thought that no modern simulation can produce. The genetic legacy they left behind is not artifact of accident, it is artifact of coherent strategy. They were editing future humans by simply surviving and thriving inside those extreme environments. Their choices built genetic momentum. Their momentum outlived their bodies. That is the definition of success measured across geological arc, not social arc. They were not speaking about empire. They were speaking about continuity. They were speaking about pattern. They were speaking about alignment with system, not domination over system. Every time modern researchers extract DNA from microfragment, they are not uncovering primitive relic. They are uncovering blueprint of alternative cognitive design. Denisovan cognition was not lower or inferior. It was lateral. It was another route to complex sentience. The fact that their branch ended physically does not mean the design failed. The design migrated into other lineages. The design distributed itself. The design dissolved into millions of living humans today. This is why the cave still feels like pressure on the mind, because the blueprint still exists inside the modern nervous system. When human stands inside original environment that birthed that structure, The old logic reactivates. It wakes from dormant mode. It boots like old code that still runs inside hardware. Modern humans can feel it, even if they cannot name it. Denisovans understood something fundamental about time that we forgot. They understood that the only real memory is encoded inside matter and inside pattern itself. They believed stability was earned through harmony with cycles, not domination over cycles. They did not chase speed, they chased coherence. They did not chase novelty, they chased accuracy of calibration with Earth timing. Their existence was not small, their existence was tuned. Think about the way modern cities create anxiety because of constant signal saturation. Denisovan world created clarity because of concentrated signal purity. They were exposed to information slow but dense. They processed information slow but deep. They made decisions with horizon that crossed glacial period scale. They were not making weekend plan. They were making 10,000-year directional calibration. This is why their internal mental architecture allowed them to solve survival problems in subtle but powerful way. They did not brute force environment. They flowed with environment. They navigated like river navigates. They shaped reality indirectly. Every action was ripple that was meant to scale across long distance and long duration. Now imagine if modern humans had that same calibration. Wars would dissolve, hyperconsumption would dissolve, panic would dissolve, decision-making would reorganize itself based on long-arc responsibility, not short-term dopamine metrics. Denisovan cognition is silent, but it is loud inside genetic memory of millions of humans. We do not talk about it because we do not have language for it. But the brain still carries compass that was tuned inside ancient mountain climate. Every ancient site that holds Denisovan signal feels like a mirror. Not mirror that reflects face. Mirror that reflects possible state of mind we lost. Not regression, not primitive, but alternative branch that could have produced a future with different type of power. Power based in pattern recognition, not exploitation. This cave, therefore, is not only archaeological site, it is calibration chamber. It is instrument, it is tuning device, it is psychological reactor. The people who walk into it with arrogance are humbled. The people who walk into it with curiosity are transformed. The people who walk into it with fear are dissolved. The cave does not care what human preference is. The cave imprints its own logic. One day in near future, a new class of researcher will measure cognition directly, while standing inside this cave and compare difference with cognition measured outside. They will see signal shift, they will see pattern shift, they will see stability shift, and that will be moment that finally forces mainstream world to admit Denisovans were not background characters in human story. They were central players, they were formative architect, they were silent engineers of hidden axis of our species. If modern humanity ever wants to evolve beyond chaos, it must remember this silent branch. It must reinstall this long arc logic. It must rebuild orientation towards stability, not extraction. It must rebuild relationship with Earth, not as resource, but as cognitive partner. Denisovan world is not gone, it is sleeping inside genetic circuitry, and this cave is the key that wakes it. Their ghost signature survived not as an echo stuck in the fossil record, but as a mathematical residue threaded inside the living. Some people today walk around carrying atoms once carried by Denisovans, without ever knowing a parallel mind once existed behind those atoms. The strange part is, their intelligence was not identical to Neanderthals, and not identical to us. It was a third direction, a third cognitive experiment of Earth. A third hypothesis nature wrote inside ice, caves, and volcanic seasons. Imagine if reality itself was building parallel software architectures, and Denisovans were one of those softwares that never got the chance to scale globally the way Homo sapiens scaled, but the code itself was never garbage collected. It remained inside the human system like hidden subroutines, dormant, silent, waiting. There are tribes in the Pacific today, high island coastlines, where the Denisovan signal is extremely strong compared to the rest of humanity. What does that imply? It implies their presence did not vanish through destruction. They dissolved into the bloodstream of the future. So their extinction was not a clean event. Their extinction was a merge event so old that humans forgot the moment it happened. We only rediscovered it when samples from the Denisova cave were sequenced, and even then it did not feel like discovering a dead ancestor. It felt like discovering a silent collaborator who never introduced themselves, and that is where everything becomes uncomfortable. Because if Denisovans merged with us and we carry some of their architecture inside our living neurons, that means part of our thinking is not originally Homo sapiens thinking. Part of our creativity, part of our night logic, part of our threat anticipation, part of our internal physics simulation engine may actually come from them. And we do not know which parts. The boundary between their mind and our mind is no longer traceable through language or culture. It is now inside our instincts. This also means history is not a timeline of isolated civilizations. History is a layered memory of consciousness experiments merging into one organism. We are the end product of multiple ancient minds consolidated over one planet. Earth never gave the crown to one species. Earth simply combined them. But if mind was merging across species, then conflict was merging too. Imagine the moment Homo sapiens groups began pressing further into mountain corridors where Denisovan clans already maintained ancestral memory networks. There was no language to mediate caution, no diplomacy structure, no treaties, no shared myth to slow speed. The meetings between the two minds were made inside cold air, inside glacial wind, inside scarcity conditions, where fear amplifies instantly. So early contact most likely oscillated between curiosity and threat within seconds. Sometimes exchange was knowledge. Sometimes exchange was pairing. Sometimes exchange was disappearance. One of the strangest things about this entire mystery is that we cannot reconstruct the scenes photographically. We have no Denisovan art. We have no Denisovan cave murals. We have no symbolic transmission. It is like they lived without externalizing their imagination into stone, the same way Neanderthals and early Homo sapiens eventually did. So when we try to reconstruct their world, it is not reconstruction through visual artifact. It is reconstruction through genetic ghost data. We read their story not from what they drew, but from what survived inside our molecular storage. Which raises one more haunting question. What if the reason they never externalized imagination into permanent art was because they believed memory did not belong outside the body? What if they believed memory was a physical layer of the living organism itself? That would mean they saw themselves not as individuals producing art, but as carriers of timeline, carriers of consciousness stack, carriers of ancestral processor load. If that was true, then from their perspective, extinction was not defeat. Extinction was deployment. The moment their code got absorbed into another species, their purpose was fulfilled. They did not lose. They executed final integration. And today, instead of seeing them as a dead branch on the evolutionary tree, we might need to see them as a component inside the architecture of our own existence. We are not just descendants of one origin. We are distributed origin. We are multi-sourced consciousness. We are the intersection of minds that no longer exist separately. If this is true, then every human alive today is not simply a timeline moving forward. Every human alive today is a museum of merged species. We are not Earth's latest version. We are Earth's compilation build. And the Denisovan chapter is one of the most silently influential modules inside this build. Most people on this planet will never say the word Denisovan in their entire lifetime, yet their heartbeat might carry molecular physics coded by them. That is the scale of this ghost influence. Now imagine you could isolate a pure Denisovan mind. Imagine you could run it inside a simulator without modern bias, without agriculture, without cities, without religion, without industrial noise. What would that mind prioritize? Would it prioritize survival as we define it? Or would it prioritize something else entirely? Maybe they carried a deep sense of long-range time. Maybe they were not optimizing for tomorrow or next winter. Maybe they were optimizing for 10,000 winters later. If evolution was a long game, they might have been thinking at a longer horizon than us. If so, we might be executing the long-term plan of an extinct mind without even knowing. This is why the cave in Siberia, where the Denisovan genome was sequenced, is not just a cave. It is a memory server room. The dust inside may contain logs of decisions that influenced the direction of entire human eras, and that cave is not alone. We now know Denisovans were spread wider than originally believed. They impacted populations from Siberia into southern Asia. They impacted the Pacific corridor deeply. They might have influenced entire ocean routing decisions indirectly, simply through what their genes provided to the humans who carried them forward. So the more we dig into this story, the more we realize that extinction is not a final state in evolutionary systems. Extinction is a handoff. Extinction is inheritance. Denisovans did not exit history. They dissolved into it. They became a silent second layer that still runs underneath us today. And this is why their story refuses to stay in the cave. Their story is inside the blood of the future.